Hey everyone, welcome on in. We're going to get started in just a second. If you want to leave a comment in the chat letting me know you're here, that would be amazing. But yeah, we're just going to give everyone a minute or two to hop on in. So if you are watching the replay, just skip forward a couple minutes. Hey Marie Pierre, thanks for being here. I actually will address just a quick few housekeeping things. I'm both streaming this to YouTube and also recording. So if there's any problems with the YouTube stream, if it ends up being really laggy or something that we can't quite predict, I do have a recording that I can then upload later. So fingers crossed the live streaming all goes well and I don't have to do that, in which case this link will remain the link to watch the replay. You can come back to this video anytime. But yeah, if for some reason my internet hates live streaming, or if it rains and the internet hates that it rains, I do have a backup of this. So yeah, I'm really excited to get started today. And here's a little outline of what we'll be going through, my little notion outline. So yeah, we'll just give another couple minutes for anyone who is able to make it live to join us. And I'm just gonna check on all my tech stuff. Okay. Okay, so we're going to, before we actually get into the bulk of the presentation, let's start with a quick cycle check-in. And I'd love to know how you are feeling about where you are in your chosen cycle at the moment. So what does that mean? Well, at the time of recording, in our lunar cycle, we've just had a new moon, and so we're kind of coming into like a waxing crescent part of the lunar cycle. The lunar cycle is actually not one that I am working with a ton at the moment, but I know some people really feel into the energies of new moons and full moons, and that's a cycle they really enjoy embracing and working with. In terms of astrological and the seasonal cycle, we're in our last day of Gemini season, which that last period of Gemini season also corresponds to the 10 of Swords. If you're a tarot person, that also means we're in the last days of spring or autumn, depending on what hemisphere you're in. This is definitely a cycle that I feel more strongly. Certainly the days getting really longer, like the light getting longer, is something I deeply enjoy, and I find myself having a lot more energy as we come into our summer season here in the Northern Hemisphere. And then for menstrual cycle, I'm currently on day 24. Which puts me in my late autumn, also known as like the premenstrual phase. And I'm currently feeling really good. My autumn, and we'll dive into that term more in a moment, but my autumn, my premenstrual phase, is actually a pretty good phase for me. I have really focused energy, which is not always true for me. So it's always nice to have that kind of like focus and that kind of ability to show up and do work that I'm really excited about. A couple days after this, I'll start needing more of my, like, I'll start feeling like physically drained and feeling quite tired. But at the moment, I'm in like a really nice sweet spot. So the point of this is to illustrate that at any moment, you're in the middle of a bunch of cycles and they all could be having an effect on you. So another cycle that I didn't mention is we're coming up to the end of the month. We're still 10 days away, but I know for a lot of people I've worked with in the past, like coming up to the end of the month can be a really stressful time. It can bring feelings of like, oh, the bills are going to be due. Or maybe it's if they get paid at the end of the month, they're kind of stretching out like their last paycheck, and so finances can feel tight. So the calendar month is a cycle that we're in that can have an effect on us. So at any point, all of us, every single human, is in the middle of a lot of cycles. In the middle of like the day is a cycle. So for me, it's 2 p.m. afternoon. And again, I feel pretty good about that. That's not always true throughout my like menstrual cycle. I don't always feel good in the afternoon. It's honestly nap time at 2 p.m. normally. But currently I have the energy and the drive to not need that. So however you identify, like whatever cycle really resonates with you, all of us are in the middle of a bunch of them. So Marie Pierre says, cycle day 15, feeling really energized, playful, confident today, and pretty calm. I love that for you. That sounds amazing. Okay, so let's dive into why we're here. So welcome to Neuroqueering menstrual cycle awareness. So just a little introduction. I know a lot of you have come to this because it was shared by someone on Instagram. And so you might be brand new to me, or you might have followed me for ages, but I thought I would just give a little quick introduction. So hi, I'm Jolie. I blame my Scorpio moon for the fact that I really hate introducing myself. This is the most uncomfortable part of the presentation for me. I don't love small talk. I'd rather just talk about like your deepest, darkest fears and what you dream of and why you cry at night. But here we are. We're doing a small talk. I use mainly she, her pronouns. I'm also good with they, them. I don't know if I fall under the non-binary umbrella or if I just think about gender in a very queer or neurodivergent way. So basically, yeah, either of those terms are fine. I consider myself a woman, and I also sometimes am like, I don't know if I buy into the concept of gender at all, and often have felt many times in certain circles where people are like, oh, I'm so happy to be here in a group of women, where I'm like, oh, I don't know if I feel comfortable kind of being lumped in with how you're talking about women. So it's a place of exploration for me at the moment. I live in the UK with my 2 kiddos. They're 11 and 13, although they're about to be 12 and 14. And that feels like a really big leap from 11 and 13. I also live with my girlfriend. I'm a diehard Taylor Swift fan. My current hyper focus is Animal Crossing, and otherwise I'm a pretty big nerd all around. I love playing board games. I love watching and playing D&D or other tabletop role-playing games. And I'm always working on mastering an under 1 minute Rubik's Cube solve. And more relevant to this workshop, I'm neurodivergent, queer, and a cycle coach. So what are our goals for today? The first thing I'd love to do is just like understand the problem, create some kind of like group awareness, make sure we're all on the same page. We want to make sure we're really clear on like what is menstrual cycle awareness, which I'll be in general abbreviating as MCA. Why might you need or want an MCA practice? And what's the issue with traditional menstrual cycle awareness spaces? Why why does it need a neuroqueer lens? And then we're going to look at that, like, how do we solve the problem, and what does it look like through having a neuroqueer lens, and what does that open up for us? And then how do we apply this to us? So as people who maybe identify as neuroqueer, or maybe you've just recognized that you don't particularly fit in with traditional menstrual cycle awareness spaces, how can we still use what's really good about having a menstrual cycle awareness practice, and how can we apply that to ourselves? How can we make it fit us? Because that's the job, right? Like, things should have to expand to fit us. We should never have to make ourselves smaller to fit in. So we'll talk a little bit about some different cyclical frameworks and charting tools that you can use. And we can talk about how we can make a practice that takes all of you into account. So that's our goals for today. I'm hoping to keep this around the hour mark and have time for questions. But if I get a little chatty or ranty, we might go over. Feel free, if you are watching live and you have to bow out at any point, that's totally okay. You don't have to make any apologies for that. This video will live on. You can come back to it and pick up right where you left off. Okay. So I also want to define some terms. It's just so, again, we're all really clear about what we are talking about. So neurodivergent just means differing in mental or neurological function from what is considered typical or normal. So in a lot of like Instagram spaces and just kind of in casual conversation, frequently neurodivergence is code for autism spectrum disorder or ADHD, but it is a wide umbrella that also includes things like dyslexia and also includes PTSD or complex PTSD, even things like anxiety disorders, or that like chronic depression falls under neurodivergence. I would also say that having high amount of adverse childhood experiences also falls under the neurodivergent umbrella, because we know that trauma, which is what adverse childhood experiences, that's the official term. It's an ACE score that you can get based on how traumatic your childhood was. We know that trauma rewires the brain. It absolutely changes the brain, and that change in brain makes it different from the normal. So anyways, so neurodivergence is quite a wide umbrella. We're not just specifically talking about the kind of, I feel like they're almost the most trendy forms of neurodivergence, which is autism, ADHD, or having both of those. Okay, queer. So when I use the term queer, I'm using it in quite like a umbrella term, like it's wide encompassing. And so we're just talking about denoting or relating to a sexual or gender identity that does not correspond to established ideas of sexuality and gender, especially heterosexual norms. So I use the label queer most often for myself in talking about my sexuality, but it can be more than that. We're not just talking about like, oh, you're queer. Like, I'm not using it as code for you're in a queer relationship. Like, it's sometimes I think it can get quite small. But actually, like, if you consider yourself queer, you're queer. You get to be here. I know with these two terms in particular, a lot can come up around like, well, am I queer enough? Like, a lot of people that I have talked with or worked with might have been in a like heterosexual relationship their whole life, but they consider themselves queer. They consider themselves either queer or bisexual or pansexual, but they don't feel like they're queer enough because they're in a straight passing relationship. And the same with neurodivergence. There can be this, oh, well, I don't have an official diagnosis. Maybe I'm just making this up. From my point of view, if you identify as either of those things, then you are those things. That is enough. And then the term neuroqueering comes from Dr. Nick Walker, who used it in a paper of theirs, and it's engaging in practices intended to undo and subvert one's own cultural conditioning and one's ingrained habits of neuronormative and heteronormative performance, with the aim of reclaiming one's capacity to give more full expression to one's uniquely weird potentials and inclinations. And so for me, it's really that last bit that like my kind of central thesis is that the menstrual cycle awareness space has quite a small lens, and it doesn't allow all of the parts of ourselves to show up. It makes us feel like we maybe have to exclude those parts, or they're just not really welcome there. And when we apply this neuroqueer lens, we're really expanding, like we are subverting our cultural conditioning. We're expanding the space to allow like full expression of ourselves. Okay. So now let's talk specifically about menstrual cycle awareness. So what is this? Generally, it's a practice of learning about and tracking your menstrual cycle, paying attention to your daily experience of your cycle, and noticing how your needs change throughout your cycle. So there's two, I think the idea was popularized by the Red School. Also, I know the book Period Power by Maisie Hill, I think it is, really kind of popularized and put into the mainstream this idea. But yeah, it is kind of what it says on the tin of it's the practice of tracking your menstrual cycle, and particularly paying attention to like the day-to-day of that. Traditionally, it will break down your cycle into 4 phases, which would be menstruation, pre-ovulatory, ovulation, and premenstruation, though it's now become fairly common, certainly in this space, to refer to those as your inner winter, your spring, your summer, and your autumn. But for how I'm going to use the term, I'm and this still feels weird to me, and I don't have good language for it, but I really kind of want to take the menstruation out of menstrual cycle awareness. And so I like to think about it as just like general body cycle awareness. And I will get more into why that is. But there's not like a good, like if I just call it body cycle awareness, that's not, I don't know, not the accepted term. I'm not sure anyone would know what that means. I'm not completely removing like menstrual cycle for me, certainly. My menstrual cycle has the biggest effect on my day to day. It has the biggest effect on my moods. So I'm still including it, but I'm not treating it as the be all and end all. I don't think it is the most important thing. And I don't think bleeding is a prerequisite for knowing about your body. I think we should all be more aware of our cycles without this focus on so heavily on like the act of menstruation, which is then tied into like the act of fertility and conception. And we'll go into that. I would love to know, have you ever tried or explored a menstrual awareness practice? What is your relationship with that? Is it a brand new space for you? I know I got what is the word I'm trying to think of? Introduced to this idea. I'm actually from a fertility lens when I was trying to get pregnant with my oldest son, so 14 years ago, was the first time I really learned about my cycle in that like, oh, this is when I ovulate and this is the signs of ovulation. And so that was my introduction to it. And then I kind of dropped it off and picked it back up a couple of years ago. But from a much different lens, absolutely no longer focused on fertility, conception, even caring really when I ovulate at all. Okay, so you might be like I am now, where you're like, I don't really care about like my menstrual cycle from the point of view of caring about when I ovulate so that I can conceive or avoid conception. I actually would just like to forget about my period altogether. Why would I need or want a menstrual cycle awareness practice? Here's the thing. So we are taught to ignore our feelings. We get told things like, as kids, right? You'll get told, don't cry, you're fine. Oh, that didn't hurt. I hear this so much from parents, and I'm sure I have said it too. I'm not judging, but it makes me makes me hurt, actually, for like my little child self. When I hear parents see their kid fall over and the kid will cry and they'll be like, that didn't hurt. I'm like, you're not in their body. You don't know that if it did or not, but we're just taught to like, oh, okay, I guess I can't trust what I'm feeling, because my parent, who I trust more than anything, is telling me something different to what I'm going through. We're taught to ignore our intuition. So you might have heard, are you sure that's what you want? Don't you want this other thing? Like, wouldn't you like this other thing better? Like, are you sure? And again, that comes from a really loving place. All of these things, almost all of them, I'm sure I have done at one point in my parenting career. So I'm absolutely no judgment, but we get told quite frequently, there's many, many different ways in which we're taught to ignore our intuition. We're taught to ignore our wanting. I want, never gets was definitely a phrase that was, I heard from adults as a kid, where you'd say like, oh, I want a cookie. And they'd say, I want, never gets. And they're trying to correct the language. In my house, it would be like, I would like a cookie, like maybe trying to make it more polite. But you just hear this in your head of like, I want, never gets. It's like, okay, don't want things. We're taught to ignore our bodily cues. Again, this I know I am guilty of like, you can't be hungry, you just ate dinner. And when my kid's like, I'm hungry, I'm like, you just ate dinner. Like, how are you? But if they're telling me they're hungry, I need to affirm their bodily cues. We're also taught to ignore our own consent. So if you were taught as a kid of like, go give grandma a kiss, don't be shy, go hug this person, don't be rude. When your own body is telling you, no, I don't want to do this, I don't feel comfortable doing this, all the adults around you are encouraging you to ignore that and go do the polite thing, right? Almost all of these are around politeness or around like, don't have that need or that want that makes me feel something that I don't want to feel, puts me in a uncomfortable place. Like for me, this comes up a lot around wanting, like wanting things. I knew as a kid that wanting things made my parents uncomfortable because they didn't have the money for it. So I prioritized making them feel comfortable. We're also taught to fit in, be like everyone else, hide parts of ourselves that we feel shame about. And we're not even necessarily outright. We're taught this, but also like instinctually, to be in the group is to be safe, and to be ostracized from the group is very unsafe. So particularly if you fall under the neuroqueer umbrella, you probably resonate with being told that you were too loud, too emotional, you talk too much, you're too picky, you're such an attention seeker, you're too weird, you're too quiet, you're too shy, you're too awkward, you're too different. In many ways, you were hyper aware of all of the pieces of you that did not fit in with the norm, all of the ways in which you were an outsider, you were the weirdo. And so we learn to chameleon, we learn to shape change and to blend in. Don't stand out. Just that's certainly for me, that was like a core thing of what it meant to be safe for me as a kid, was to not stand out. And not even from like a neuroqueer lens, but just from like my family background. I didn't want to draw attention to like sometimes things that were going on at home, or like the differences in my family and other kids' families. Like I would often lie about my family dynamic, like when we would draw family trees. My parents divorced when I was quite young, and they have other kids from other marriages, and it's quite a complex family tree. And I just didn't want to be that different from the other kids, and I would lie and pretend that my parents didn't have other marriages or other kids, because it was just easier to fit in. Also, for anyone socialized as female, we got messages that encourage us to ignore our needs, put others before ourselves, right? To be female in our society is really to be selfless. But then there's also this piece of be hardworking, be dependable, be like a good little girl. Oh, you're so trustworthy. I can rely on you. You're not like your brothers. You're so dependable, right? Like, I can count on you. Which means like you can't ever make a mistake. You can't ever be messy. We're taught to like hide parts of ourselves away, so that we don't distract or tempt the boys. Taught not to be angry. We're taught, or it's quite a fact that you can be seen as nice or you can be seen as competent, but you can't be both. There's a lot of studies around this. And often it's safer to be nice. It's safer to not upset the fragile man standing in front of you. So we like hide away how smart we are. We hide away how competent we are. And we use a lot of language to like soften things up, so that we are seen as likable. Having a menstrual cycle in particular could have been a real source of shame and body loathing. And of course, this is also true for anyone socialized as male. You were also taught to hide away parts of yourselves, hide away emotions or feelings or anything that could be a sign of weakness. Taught to, you have to be a breadwinner, you have to be a provider, you have to be strong, you have to be capable. So hide away anything that is not that. And so this does go both ways, of course. So in order to be liked, to be seen as good or worthy or lovable, in order to fit in, we had to abandon parts of ourselves. And the more we abandon those parts, we eventually stop even acknowledging that we had them in the first place. We stop acknowledging that we have needs, we have wants, we have desires, that we have these parts that want to come out, want to be seen, want to be loved. We just like, no, I don't have them. I don't need anything. I'm fine. I'm so dependable. I don't need anything. I can do it all myself. Like, look how good I am. Look how good I'm doing at adulting. Please give me my gold star. I don't need a single thing. And this is a massive problem. Like, this is not a healthy way to go through life. This is not good for your relationships. But more than that, like, it disconnects us from our body, and it disconnects us from our intuition, our knowing, like the part of you that says like, I want more than this. I have dreams, I have desires. Like, we're just completely separate from that. So this often shows up as like feeling really angry just about everything, feeling really resentful in relationships, feeling like I do everything for everyone else and no one does anything for me. Like, why doesn't anyone just choose me for once? Like, I just like sacrifice something, just be a little bit inconvenient to help me out. Like, I'm always rearranging my schedule to be there for everyone else, but no one does that for me. And ultimately, like, you feel a sense almost of being like unloved, uncared for, unappreciated. And that's just a really sucky way to go about life. But like, yeah, more than that, like on a bigger scale, like for me, certainly, I have talked about in the past how like when I came back to my body and like really worked on getting to know myself again was when I finally like realized or accepted or allowed like my queerness to come through. That was a piece of myself that I had been denying for a really long time because I thought it made me a bad mother. I thought, yeah, like it just, I had to be the best. And from all of my family stories, that meant not being queer. And And so I was missing out on this really beautiful, amazing part of myself, and in an absolutely miserable relationship, because I was so disconnected from my body. So understanding our body and our cycles is the first step to building awareness of your needs, wants, and desires. It's the first step to cultivating the deep kind of self-trust needed to make decisions that come from what's true for you. Not what's true about everyone else around you, not what everyone else thinks, not what everyone else says you should do, not anything else, but like what is true for you in your core, because this is your life. So not anyone else's life. Like you have one life and it's yours, and you should be living it for you ultimately. It's the first step to forming the level of self-acceptance that is needed to bring back all of those lost parts. But we have to intentionally cultivate a practice of paying attention. It is not something that just you stumble across and you're like, oh, wow, like I found this lost piece. Or like, oh, I suddenly know myself better. Like it is a practice that we have to show up for. I view a lot of things as relationships. Like I think about how I have a relationship with creativity. I have a relationship with my work. I have a relationship with my audience, and I have a relationship with myself, with my intuition, with the universe. Like if you're more of a spiritual lens, like whatever is guiding me on a path, that is a relationship that I have to cultivate. And for me, relationships are about how we show up every day in the little moments. It is not one big grand gesture. It is not a sense of conditionality of like, oh, I've done this thing, now you do this thing for me. It is just showing up every single day and prioritizing it. So that is kind of my thesis about why I'm like really, really passionate about having some form of cycle awareness practice. Mara Glatzel wrote a brilliant book called Needy, and she says, getting to know your inner landscape is a prerequisite for tending to your needs. Your inner landscape is composed of your thoughts, feelings, self-talk, deeply held beliefs, the influence of your ancestral knowledge, including both beautiful and traumatic moments experienced by previous generations, and your personal vision for what is possible for you in your life. And so this also ties into, like, for me, why we need to expand the lens of menstrual cycle awareness beyond just the literal, like, oh, my uterine lining dies and sheds. Like it is more than that. It is bigger than that. It is your thoughts and your feelings and your beliefs, and paying attention to those. It is so much more than just this like physical thing that happens every 28 days or however long. Okay, so now we move into, okay, so like maybe I've sold you on the idea of a menstrual cycle awareness practice and you're like, cool, I'm in. But what's the issue with traditional menstrual cycle awareness spaces? Ideology. So a lot of time in these spaces, as I have alluded to, like we're focused on the physical act of like our uterine lining growing and shedding, and that ovulation and menstruation. So this means there's a strong focus on fertility, either trying to conceive or avoiding pregnancy, and or reconnecting with your femininity, like as a goal, that we are practicing menstrual cycle awareness to reconnect with our divine feminine power. And there's a demonization of hormonal contraceptive pills, that is not a natural cycle. You can't access the wisdom of your womb if you're on pills. It makes me so angry and I could really go on a rant. But like, this is just, it's such a small lens. And there's like nothing wrong with a focus on fertility if that is your particular goal, whether it's trying to conceive or avoiding pregnancy. But that's also like, that is a specific practice called fertility awareness method. And I hate that the two, like that, practicing a cycle awareness practice does not need to be so narrowly focused. And I'm also just really not sold on the idea that like reconnecting with my feminine is something I need to do, something I should do, something that should be held like aloft as like, this is an amazing goal. Like you don't get to say that for me. As a person who does have a menstrual cycle, you don't get to put that on me. There's an emphasis on getting to a place where you view menstruation as a positive divine event, and that anything else is depriving your body of its magical cyclical wisdom. Again, like, I can have all of the benefits of a menstrual cycle awareness practice, like the benefits that I believe are there, that reconnecting with my body, without it needing to be some magical event. And also I can still, you still get that even if you don't view menstruation as a positive thing. Like, that's not going to be for everyone. Obviously, like, there's so many different experiences of menstruation, and to me, they're all valid. The focus for tracking, so there's a focus on fertility, but the focus for tracking is also strongly related to fertility. So a lot of like the focus, that what they'll tell you to track can be things like your temperature, your cervical mucus, your cervical position. And again, acknowledging that like menstrual cycle awareness is not the same as a fertility awareness method practice, but the overlap is massive and the distinction is not always as clear as it could be. Like, we don't have to track those things, and you still get to have a valid practice. There's little understanding of how menstrual cycles and neurodivergence interfere with each other, but in general, the lens is very neurotypical. So just one example of like, you will often paint the portrait of an ovulating woman as someone who's like feeling so sexy and so sociable and the life of the party. But like in reality, ovulation fucks with my ADHD. I'm overstimulated. I'm overwhelmed. I like feel like a frayed wire, and I don't want to socialize. Now, yes, I might crave connection and I might crave intimacy, but that looks different than this portrait of like what it's telling me I should be. Oh, you should look like this around ovulation. You should do this. You should eat these foods. And I'm like, but again, you're telling me how I should be. You're not listening to how I am. There's, whoops, I don't know. I hate when I do that. Okay. There's often an unhealthy emphasis on diet, exercise, and health, like particularly hormonal health, which has its roots in diet culture and toxic wellness. So this is something to look out for if you, I think I'm offering these as like, if you leave here and you venture out into the menstrual cycle awareness space, like these are things to be aware of, because what happens is, moving to my last point, all of this combined can create a space where the belief that all the parts of you aren't welcome gets reinforced. And you just end up trying to become a version of you that fits in that world and not this true version of you. So I'm making this statement, this big thesis, that a menstrual cycle awareness practice is going to help you reconnect with lost parts of yourself and bring all the parts of yourself to the table. But if you just go out into the regular menstrual cycle awareness space, particularly as a neuroqueer person, you're going to be bombarded with messages that tell you that, oh no, all the parts of myself aren't allowed. And you'll participate in a practice that just keeps reaffirming like, oh, I'm not doing womanhood as like I should be. Honestly, nothing has made me question my gender more than being in these menstrual cycle awareness spaces that I have like stumbled through over the past year, really, where I'm just like, I don't feel feminine in the way that they tell me feminine should be. I don't feel soft or pretty, like, and that's nothing to do with aesthetic. It's a thing where I'm just like, I feel too big, and I feel like I'm cramming myself into a space, and I just feel like I'm doing it wrong. And so then what happens is I go, this menstrual cycle awareness thing sucks, I'm out. I don't want anything to do with this, because I no longer am willing to cram myself into spaces that aren't made for me, that aren't big enough for me. But then that results in just losing out on this amazing practice. Like, I'm really, really pro, I think it comes across, like really pro having a cycle awareness practice. I'm just really anti how this space is so small and tells us only a small amount of us fit in it. So, okay, moving forward to better pastures. What does menstrual cycle awareness look like through a neuroqueer lens? So this is the lens that I am bringing to this space, that I'm trying to bring to this space, and how I view it. Removing the focus on fertility and conceiving. Again, like, leave that to fertility awareness method. Again, there's space if this is really for you, if this is really what you want, cool. But like, my lens is, no, we're removing the focus on fertility and conceiving, as well as any gender assumptions. And bringing in a wider lens of cyclical information that we might be interested in. So things like moods, energy, sleep, focus, creativity, physical symptoms, emotions, needs, wants, beliefs, thoughts, bringing in that inner landscape. That an MCA practice can be about your whole inner landscape, not just this one tiny spot. And I also want to say, like, some people are doing this. If you are like in my small circle of like cycle coaches I know, I'm not saying that no one is doing this, but few of us are. I would like to potentially even de-emphasize the focus on menstruation and ovulation, depending on a particular client's goals. And this also includes accepting that menstrual cycles without menstruation are still a real and valid cycle, and that having a goal of stopping menstruation is valid. Again, removing that, like, oh my God, there's so much wisdom. Again, I'm not saying that's not true, but it's not the be all and end all. It's not true for everyone. And there's nothing, I'm not erasing something from you if I'm like, I don't think there's like a whole bunch of wisdom in my menstrual cycle. I think there's a lot of wisdom in my body, and a lot of wisdom like in my intuition. But yeah. So accepting lots of different menstrual cycles and accepting that like there are lots of real and valid cycles. And this, like, menstrual cycles without menstruation, it can be for a lot of reasons, right? Like, some people are on a contraceptive that means they don't experience a bleed, but they might still absolutely feel like they have a cycle. Also, there's very small studies on non-binary menstruators and also trans women and how trans women experience a cycle. But they're in this very small study that I read, the trans women reported as feeling like they had a cycle, like they could track, and they're like, oh, I'm in this week of my cycle. They're missing the like relief almost of having a bleed, but they were absolutely experiencing a cycle. And so when we put such an emphasis on like the menstruation part, we're completely denying them access to this whole practice and to their wisdom too. Also, acknowledging that every experience of a cycle is unique and that there's more than one way to be a powerful, magical, wise, cyclical being. Again, this includes cycles of trans folks, masc and femme, non-binary folks, as well as cis women who have alternative experience of cycles. Maybe that's due to biological differences, to their age, or to like health complications or surgeries that they might have had. Yeah, it's been really surprising to me that in the menstrual cycle awareness space, there's not more consideration of like people who get their ovaries removed for some reason. And then they're like, oh, I don't know what to do. This person doesn't have ovaries. It's like, okay, they still have, if they're telling you they have a cycle, they still have a cycle. Or we get I don't know if we're surprised, but there's some talk around how people going through menopause feel erased from society. They feel invisible, right? Like they feel like they don't, they're not seen, that there is older women become invisible. And I'm like, well, this has its roots in right here, right now, when we're like, it's all about menstruation. This is where your power is. Then you lose your menstrual cycle, like the actual menstrual cycle, literally. Of course, you then feel a little lost, feel a little erased, because the whole identity was centered on this. And how I view it, of like any of us who have like female reproductive organs could lose our breasts, lose our ovaries, lose our uterus, and certainly we're all going to go through menopause and lose our menstrual cycle. And so, like, any one of those things is not where my particular womanhood lives. It's not where my particular wisdom is. Like, if we go on and on about accessing your womb wisdom, and then I have uterine cancer and my whole uterus is removed, did I lose all my wisdom? Was that literally, that's where it was stored, and now I don't have a womb, so tough luck. Like, it just makes me really mad. And I would like to remove the glorification, lastly, of the feminine and the demonizing of the masculine. Like, masculine energy is not synonymous with the patriarchy, and divine feminine energy is not the antithesis to the patriarchy, and it's not even the solution to the patriarchy, because the concept has roots in patriarchy. And so, like, then again, not making any assumptions about which energy a client might prefer to work with. And just for any cycle coaches who might be watching, this applies to your cis straight femme women as well. Like, think about all of the pieces that we have discarded of ourselves because we think they're not as we should be. And so this encouragement to like lean into a divine feminine energy can become coded as: you should be soft, you should be quiet, you should be intuitive, you should be moving through the world in a certain way. And then when they're like, well, actually, I kind of sometimes want to work like 16 hours a day because like I get this real focus and like this real masculine traditionally like energy drive, and like I'm quite ambitious, and like for like this week or these couple weeks, like just really want to lean into that energy. We can be, with our language and how we talk about things, like subconsciously telling them that part is not allowed. And like, for me, the whole purpose of, if nothing else, the whole purpose of any cycle awareness practice, menstrual cycle awareness practice, is that all of the parts of you are valid and allowed. So, and you just, whenever we're like, this is the thing, this is the goal, we're automatically saying this other thing is not acceptable. Please, if you have that part, no, you can't sit with us. Okay. If there's any questions, by the way, feel free to ask in the chat as I go, and including if you're watching the replay, you can just leave a comment. I will see them all. Okay, so we've moved through what is my menstrual cycle awareness, why am I so passionate about it, and what's the problems with the traditional way that it gets approached, and why we might appreciate a neuroqueer lens, and also like acknowledging that when we widen the lens to include like neurodiverse and queer experiences, we're also widening that umbrella to allow just so many more experiences in. So again, like you might have cis, straight, femme presenting woman in front of you who is passionately child free and feels quite excluded by all the conversations around like motherhood in the space. Like, we're bringing them into. Okay, so let's talk about some other, I did it again. I apologize. Okay, what other frameworks can we use besides the like 4 phases of menstruation, right? If I'm trying to de-emphasize ovulation and menstruation, like, what else can we do? And again, those things are still allowed. I still focus on when I'm bleeding, particularly as like a physical symptom. But we can have other frameworks. So these are the traditional frameworks around the outer edge of menstruation, pre-ovulatory, ovulation, and pre-menstruation. There's lots of different frameworks, and these frameworks do not have to be mapped one-to-one with your menstrual cycle. So if you absolutely like don't want to work with a menstrual cycle, or you don't experience a menstrual cycle or a typical menstrual cycle, I'm not kind of just changing the language, but still talking about the same thing. It can be, because it can feel more comfortable. If you experience a menstrual cycle that feels quite dysphoric for you, using different language might just make that feel better. But also, this can be completely removed from a menstrual cycle. So the most common one is what I mentioned at the beginning of talking about your winter, your spring, your summer, and your autumn. And these can be mapped one-to-one with the menstrual cycle, or you could, I just really resonate with this language of, so like, what does winter feel like? What is the energy of winter? And when do I feel that energy in my cycle? Because for me, the reason why I like the seasons is because I think about it in terms of nature. So there's a period in winter of stillness, of rest, of planning, for me, of like underground work. Things are growing underground, ready to like push through in spring. Or maybe we're like tending to the earth itself to bring nutrients into it, like really kind of restorative practices. When does that happen in your cycle? Because it needs to. There needs to be periods of like rest and restoration. So like, when is that winter part of your cycle? And then moving into like, when in your whatever cycle you're working with, when does that spring come for you? That feeling of things starting to bloom. You don't know what's bloomed yet, right? Like when those early plants pop through and you can't quite tell of like, oh, is that going to be a weed or is that a tomato plant? It's curious. It's page energy in like the tarot. When is that part of your cycle? When do you allow for that playful, curious, childlike nature? When do you allow yourself to explore, experiment? Moving into your summer. Summer is things in full bloom, harvesting. Summer is, for me, an interesting balance of work, but also like the days are so long that there's plenty of time for long work days and really playful evenings. So like it can be a really full on period of a cycle. Like, and as I mentioned in the beginning, often just like in my literal experience of around my ovulation, it is too much. It is, I actually like need to not allow it to be as expansive as it is, because it's just the volume's turned up too loud and I can't handle it. But in terms of like summer, the season, it's never too much. It is, I am all here for summer. So yeah, what is kind of really coming into full force, and you're harvesting, and it can be, a time when you bring things out into the world. Like if we're talking about like an offer, let's say you're in a cycle of having an offer that you're creating. And you spent some time really being creative and dreamy about it. And then you spent some time like playfully experimenting, trying things, testing things. And now we're really bringing it out into the world and we're like launching it and talking about it and the full spotlight is on it. And then we move into an autumn of a cycle, which is that like need to reflect on how things went, to chop down what didn't work. Like, a thing that I really love in this is because I work with my cycle as also like my month. Like yeah, like my work month, my work cycle, I like to think about autumn as like cutting everything off of my to-do list. Like if it didn't get done, it has to be something really, really important to get moved into the new cycle that I'm entering with work, like to bring forward it into the new month. So autumn's that time of like pruning, reflecting, preparing, slowing down, really gathering and getting ready to go into the rest. Or it can just also look like, if we're talking about like creativity or launching an offer, it can look like delivering the thing. Like you opened the doors to your course in your summer and you talked about it, and now people are in, and in autumn we're like, okay, cool, now we're doing the thing. It can be quite practical. Yeah, so that's like a way of thinking about the seasons and using that energy of like, what is nature doing in these various seasons, like letting things die off at the end of autumn, and how can we apply that to like cycles, whether you're looking at your month, whether you're looking at the year, your personal year, or like your quarter, your business quarter, whatever that looks like. We can also think about cycles in terms of astrology. So again, this is like a cycle of the year if we're zoomed out, but zooming in, like I often think about, if we look at summer, like Leo energy has that real playfulness, spotlight, but then like for me, I experienced that real post-ovulation dip, and it helps me to think about that as Virgo season, because Virgo season I hate. Virgo season is still summer, but it's like the lights got turned on, the party's over, and now I have to clean up the mess that I made in summer. But it's also like, okay, you had your fun, come on now, we're entering into autumn, we've gotta like get our shit together again. Like, what do we have to get in place? Because you can't continue this behavior that you've been doing in summer, you can't do this in autumn. So I often think about like the energy. So something that can happen, again, like in a menstrual cycle, when you enter into the spring phase, so the bleed has stopped, if you start to feel good again, you can be like, oh my God, I have so much energy. I'm like, I have to go do all the things now. And you can sometimes feel like you have a lot of creative ideas, or like, you suddenly think of like all these tasks that have to get done, but it's Aries season. So like those early days of your pre-ovulatory phase, I like to think about them as Aries season. Aries is baby fire. It is not full-grown mature fire. It's a baby fire. It needs tending to. And so like that feeling of overwhelm can become like lead to burnout, because we have like a tiny bit of energy, but we feel like we have, oh my God, I should just do all the things. And it can create a lot of overwhelm. It can create a lot of anxiety. So sometimes bringing in the framework of the zodiacs helps me understand my cycles a little bit better. And again, we can apply this to like a creative cycle. Like, what does it look like to be in the Scorpio phase of whatever cycle you're particularly working with? Again, we can do lunar cycles. So new moon and full moon, and then you would have the first quarter and third quarter on the sides. So you could just work with that cycle. But again, still following the same framework of like the new moon correlating to maybe for you a feeling of stillness, a feeling of rest, but you might have a whole different interpretation of the new moon. It might make you feel completely different. So you kind of get to determine what these portions of your cycle look like. I do find the framework of having kind of four phases really helpful. I'm trying to think why that is, if there's a reason specifically. I think because like a week is all my brain can really conceptualize. Like breaking things down into like a week kind of chunk. If we're thinking about a month, you can break that down into four weeks. If we're thinking about like zodiac seasons, have consist of 4 weeks. You could break like Aries seasons down into like, what is the winter of Aries season? What is the spring of Aries season? What is the summer of Aries season? What is the autumn of Aries season, right? Like we can apply these different lenses. Or moving away from the seasonal things, what does it look like to go into, so we're about to move into Cancer season. What does it look like to move into Cancer season with first an attitude of dreaminess, and then initiating something or exploring something, and then really kind of bringing in what is being illuminated or what needs to be visible, and then ending Cancer season with reflection. Like, what would it look like to just do kind of daily tracking or weekly reflections within a particular zodiac season, with those kind of keywords. But really, you can kind of create your own keywords for however you feel like your cycle breaks up. Okay. So the other thing I want to talk about is so we talked about some different frameworks and just like different words we might use, and different ways of dividing. But then how do we turn this into a practice that takes all of you into account? So the first thing I'm curious about with whenever I'm doing this work is what feels challenging or unresolved in your life right now. What's stopping you from feeling absolutely amazing? And this is not, it's a tricky question because I don't believe we need to or should, or there's something wrong with us if we're not feeling amazing all the time. But it's also an interesting question to just kind of sit with, of okay, what's stopping me from feeling absolutely amazing right now? And if I was to answer that for myself, so I would think actually, okay, I feel really good. I'm really enjoying this workshop and being live. It's quite energizing. I have maybe a little head tension, probably haven't drank enough water, or I'm getting to the point where I've been talking a lot and I'm dehydrated. And I'm a little tired because I didn't sleep that much last night. So I could use a nap. So even though I am great, there's still that okay, what am I not tending to? Okay, I haven't quite tended to what I call my body domain. I haven't really tended to my physical needs, because my creativity and my work got so much attention. It's okay, what's slipping here? And so then if I was to make a practice out of this, I would be focusing okay, I need to spend some time focusing on my body domain, and creating and cultivating some kind of practice or awareness around that. Because I can tell that maybe that feels that's slipping a little bit. I think it's also important to just ask what language are you comfortable with and not comfortable with. Just as you start to pick a framework, just really take a moment to check in with yourself of what feels comfortable and what am I doing sort of by default of oh, well, Jolie talked about it in that way, so I just will do it that way. And then you realize 3 weeks from now, I feel really, this makes me feel I'm dressing up in someone else's clothes. This doesn't feel like me. I'm actually not that comfortable with it. That might be a whole practice in and of itself of what am I comfortable with and what am I not comfortable with. But I think taking that into consideration straight from the start can be really helpful. And then what else are you bringing to the table? So this could be, for me, being in a relationship with someone else who experiences a menstrual cycle is something that really affects how I experience my own cycles. So that might be something I want to consider. I also, I mentioned I have 2 kids. I share custody with their dad. And so that's its own separate cycle, and whether the kids are here with me or if they're not here with me, again, is also like a data point or like another cycle that kind of affects my own cycle. So like that might be something I might not want to only track my like very personal cycle. I might also want to at the same time track a different cycle going on to see like how are these two interplaying. Is there anything else? Is there trauma that needs to be acknowledged as you bring it to the table? Is there some mental health thing going on at the moment that needs attention and awareness that you're bringing it to the table? Just getting clear on those things and then using all of that to inform your exploration and your framework. So as some examples, you might simply want to work on paying attention to and becoming more in tune with your own rhythms. This, like, literally not trying to change anything, not trying to fix anything, just paying attention. How did I feel today? What is one word to describe this day? As simple as that. What did I feel in my body? What did I feel emotionally? What did I feel in my mind in terms of like focused or motivated or unmotivated or distracted? You might want to explore how your relationship to creativity changes in terms of a cycle. So again, just literally tracking like, okay, I felt creative today. I was really excited to write. The words were really easy. And then now I wrote and my inner critic was really loud and was telling me everything was terrible. So you might just want to track, like, if that's something that's feeling really challenging to you right now, you might just want to track how your relationship to creativity is changing. You might want to think about like, oh, what are some of like the strengths in different parts of my cycle and what are like some things where I'm weaker. And by this, I just mean like there are parts of my cycle where I am really good at like organizing things. So if there's like a house project, like admin type stuff, sorting out my money, like catching up on bills, sorting out taxes, like any admin-y task, there's parts of my cycle where I'm like, oh, this is that just needs to be saved to there. Often I can like beat myself up for things of like, oh, why haven't you done this yet? And I'm like, oh, I'm just not in the right part of my cycle to do that. There are parts of my cycle where I am really creative and I have ideas and I have like I can brainstorm all day long, but don't ask me to do anything practical. There are parts of my cycle where like don't send me to the grocery store. The other week I went to the grocery store for one specific thing. I came back with everything else but that one specific thing, and I was so frustrated. I was like, I should have known better. I shouldn't have gone grocery shopping. It was way too like my mind was all over the place. But like, do you need me to deep clean all our cupboards? Like, yes. Like sometimes it will be like I need to do more physical things. Because like I can just play a bunch of music and like, you know, then hyper focus on like a manual task, but like something that requires me to kind of keep one train of thought in my head is not working. So you might just like want to pay attention to what was really good about that part of my cycle and what wasn't good. Along the same lines, you might feel like you want to track just like how your energy is, how your moods are, your focus, your food preferences. My food preferences certainly change, like just like what feels good or what feels appealing. Or I guess what I've really noticed is that in my autumn part of my cycle, I become sort of food averse in that just like I really don't care. And so I will gravitate towards what's easy because nothing sounds appealing But if what's really easy is something that's a bit greasy, it makes me feel physically ill. And so I have to make sure that what is really easy is also a food that for my digestion system is going to be pleasant. And as I'm talking about this, tracking these different things, if you're like, you might feel like, some of you might be saying to yourselves, but I don't have a cycle. Again, I'm not using the word cycle as a synonym for menstrual cycle. What I'm talking about is like, your cycle could be the month, and you could just track these things throughout the month. Your cycle could be the lunar cycle or the zodiac cycle, and you can just use that as a framework. And then what can happen is you might find patterns appearing. You might start noticing, and it doesn't mean they're correlated, right? But you just might start noticing like, oh, at this point, like every 14 days or every 20 days, I'm like really, really angry. Okay, then we can start building out like, okay, so this thing is repeating kind of every 28 days. Let's use that as a fixed point, and let's see what other patterns we can notice. So you just need to start with like one kind of framework where we can just, this is our start point and this is our end point, and we're just going to track this thing for that many days. And then we can kind of see what cycle or rhythms or patterns fall out of it. And then when I talk about like your cycle, I'm really just talking about your innate cycle. What is, like you are a cyclical being. You have peaks and troughs. You have periods of rest and periods of not rest, right? Like you just have a cycle, whatever it is, whatever that means to you. We're not just like constant robots where we're always the same. Like we just have cyclical ways of being. And you might be like, oh, I'm actually really just aligned with the calendar cycle. Like this just feels, the first of the month really feels like a start to me. The end of the month really feels like an end to me. Cool. Like that, you align with that. That's awesome. I don't align with the calendar cycle. I have no idea what day it is half the time. Like it's not important to me. What is really important to me is today a day that, a transition day is what I call them, like when we're swapping custody with the kids, when that made it sound way more formal. Like when the kids are coming here and when the kids are leaving, like that's really important to me. But like the week of the month, not important to me. Is today a day I have to make dinner, or is today a day I don't have to make dinner? That's important to me. That is an important part of my cycle. I don't actually care that it's the 20th and it's a Tuesday. Okay. So you might want to track identifying what you need in different parts of your cycle or what isn't working. So this might mean today I really needed more reassurance that I'm loved. Like I really needed words of affirmation from my partner. Maybe you didn't ask for it, maybe you didn't get it, but if you can just start with identifying that you needed it, then we can go somewhere from that. Okay. And you might also want to work with a particular belief for a cycle, and just like, how does that belief change? And what is my relationship to that belief? When does it feel sticky? When does it feel like, oh, actually, I don't even know why I was ever bothered by that thought. Doesn't feel like an issue right now. And see what gets learned and uncovered. So just some ideas of things you might want to play with. It could be relationships, like actual relationships with people in your life. Tracking like, oh, I felt really angry at them. What you might tend to notice is whatever cycle you're using. There might be a part of your cycle where truth becomes more evident. So if you experience a menstrual cycle, or if you feel really tied into like if the moon really affects you, you might notice it at that point. But usually, especially in the menstrual cycle, what I call Sag season hits, and Sag season is when truths become undeniable. So this often, like in what am I trying to say? In people that I observe, in women who are in relationships with men that I observe, there's a part of their cycle where, like, we just stereotypically call this PMS, and it's like, oh, I'm just annoyed with everyone. And so they get really annoyed with their partners. But for me, I'm like, oh, that's Sag season. And what is the truth there? What is the truth behind that annoyance? Why are we so quick to write off our annoyance as being irrational, as being hormonal, and therefore as like being inconsequential and not meaning anything? Like, why are we so quick to do that? Like, what is actual, okay, so yes, it's amplified. It's amplified so you can hear it because you're not hearing it the rest of your cycle. Like, what is true? What truth is coming through in that part of your cycle? So you might like pay attention to do you have those moments where you're like, oh my God, I'm just so angry. And it just seems to be happening. It can feel like it's happening randomly. But you're like, I can tell this is happening regularly, but I just don't feel like there's a pattern to it. There may not be. Usually I'm pretty good at finding one. And again, like, this is where I talk about, or this is what I mean about paying attention to other cycles, because it could be, we could realize there's a connection to a certain bill being due, or your rent payment, your mortgage payment, or a credit card payment. And like, as that date of that credit card payment gets closer and closer, you just start feeling like really angry, really frustrated. And we could be like, oh, you think this is random, but actually it's tied to this event. This is the cycle that you're in right now, the cycle of this bill being due. And at this point in your cycle, you're like really feeling some feelings about it. And then you pay it, and there's relief, right? You pay it, we're in relief. We bled the money, figuratively, literally. And then we're fine, right? Then it's all fine. We're cool. We're playful. We're spending money again. It gets closer to that bill being due. And now we're in the, like, what would be considered like the equivalent of like that premenstrual feelings, having a lot of feelings. Scorpio coming in also with like feelings about it. So I'm talking about all this in like cycle language and in making comparisons to the menstrual cycle, but I really, like, we are all in 1,000 different cycles at the moment. And so just noticing like, oh, this anger thing is happening. Can we, like, let's pay attention. What other cycles are going on? What else are you bringing to the table? Okay, so that's a little bit about how to make a practice that takes all of you into account. The last thing I wanted to leave you with is just like, okay, what's my next step? Like, what do I do? That was a lot of information. So like, cool, deep breaths. This video's here for you. Go back and rewatch any bits. I can also link to these notes. So let it settle. But the first thing is to just give tracking a try. Like, let's just get some data to work with. You don't have to pick the right cycle. You can just start with the days of the month, if that feels easy. Start with the lunar cycle. Start with your menstrual cycle. Start with the zodiac. Like, just start with something. Have a day one. And just track. And you can track a word. You can track notes about your moods. Whatever it is that, like, just keep a focus of like, oh, I'm working with this belief. I'm working with my moods. I'm working with my focus levels. I'm working with just gathering data of like, I just want to pay more attention to my body. So just start tracking. 3 suggestions for doing this. I'm obsessed with the Notes app. You can make a table. You can make a little spreadsheet in your notes app. You could also make a spreadsheet in like a Google Sheets or numbers on your phone. The numbers app, if you're an iPhone user. Spreadsheets, as a data nerd, I absolutely love. But I love just using my notes app. So you can fit like 3 cycles on a screen on your phone. And yeah, just fill them in. There's lots of different apps that you can use. I focused more on the menstrual cycle. There is one that is focused on the moon. That might, like if you're working with the lunar cycle, there is an app, I think it's called, let me just search on my phone. I didn't quite get on with it, so I don't have it top of mind. But I think it's like Moon Calendar or something. I'll link it below. Or you can just search for moon apps. But yeah, lots of different apps, again, mainly focused on menstrual cycles. Clue is the most popular one. I am so fed up of it asking me to purchase the paid subscription. I'm so fed up of it, like, just keep asking me if I want to switch to, like, I don't know what's wrong with my Clue app, but it just keeps, like, suggesting that, oh, if you upgrade, we can track fertility and conception and stuff. And I'm like, I don't care. So I just was really annoyed with the Clue app. I don't love the experience of it. So Stardust is one that I've been playing with. This is what it looks like. I like the kind of images that it uses for tracking feelings and emotions. There are some things I don't love about it. I wish I could turn off the suggestion to track my cervical mucus, to track my birth control, and to track what kind of sex I had. Like, because it gives, did you have unprotected sex? Did you have protected sex? And I'm like, well, I had sex in which there was no chance of me getting pregnant. So is that protected? Like, I just don't need to track that. But like, so I wish I could turn those off. But for the most part, it's okay. And I like that it shows the lunar cycle. So this was, I screenshot that yesterday. You can see that we just had the new moon, and it's showing that. And so it kind of shows you like which phase of the lunar cycle was I bleeding in and stuff. So it also shows what my hormones are doing. I really don't care. My hormones, I don't know. I don't need to literally know what they're doing. I just know how they feel in my body. Anyways, it's a pretty cool, decent app if you're more of an app person. And the last is journaling. These are 2 different, just like draw them on a piece of paper type things you can do. So for the top one, you are kind of just like dividing your cycle into 4 things. You can put the dates, you can put out the 4 markers of your cycle. Like if you were using the 4 phases of the moon or whatever you're using, you can mark those. And then just taking notes in each quadrant, removing the kind of focus on a day-to-day and just viewing it in terms of that breakdown. You can also, in this version, track like 3 different things. So maybe you're tracking like moods, how you feel in your physical body, and how you feel mentally. These I explain more in depth in my Charting You program, and you get these handouts. I will explain that in a minute, but just to give you ideas of like, you can literally just draw this on a piece of paper, and just, yeah, fill in your thoughts, about your cycle. And I think this one's, like, the journaling one can be really nice for like creative projects. Like if you're really just kind of viewing it as like, okay, like I'm in rest, and then I'm in exploring, and then I'm in like sharing, and then I'm in reviewing. You could almost like fill these in once a week. So yeah, different options. Okay. Absolutely last, I just wanted to explain how you can work with me and take this work further. If you're like, yes, I really want to do this work, I really feel that call to like reconnect with my body, advocate for my needs, wants, and desires. But first I have to figure out what the fuck I need, want, and desire. This can be like overwhelming and tricky to do yourself. So I have a 3-month program called Charting You. You work with me 1-to-1 for 3 months. You receive cycle tracking tools, again, like catered to you. So looking like this, not like a default of like, oh, you have to work with your menstrual cycle. Like we'll talk about what cycle you're working with, making sure you have the right tools. You get worksheets, you get videos, resources to support you on that journey. So there's basically a whole like course portion that is being built out that you get access to. And then you have open access to me on Voxer for coaching. So Voxer is an app that allows us to send text and voice messages. I do all of my coaching over Voxer as opposed to on Zoom, because again, coming from it from like specifically that neurodivergent lens, video calls aren't super sustainable for me, and I have a whole list of reasons why I think Voxer coaching is really, really amazing and really supportive, particularly from that neuroqueer lens. So I do all of my coaching on that, and so you can check in every day if you need it. If you want to literally do your cycle check-ins with me every day, awesome. If something's come up and you're feeling a little bit sticky about something, we can have a mini coaching session right then and there, just like a quick text back and forth. We could also do longer check-ins once a week if like that's what you want. You control how you use this space, how you show up for the coaching. You get to do a mix, like whatever ends up really working for you so that you feel supported in this journey that you're on. Great, we'll make that work. And you get to take up as much of that space and make the most of it in whatever way you want. And then you also get to keep all access to the course materials. So when that 3 months is up, you still get the Charting You course materials, everything that came with the package. And you can always, if you start feeling stuck again, or if something else comes up that you want more coaching about, you can just basically purchase more Voxer coaching with me. So the course portion takes you through starting your daily tracking process and incorporating weekly reflections, creating a cycle wisdom map, which is a really fun exercise. Just love it so much. And it just really shows like how much you already know. Brings so much awareness and information to like, what are those different parts of your cycle? Like, what does winter look like in terms of a season? Like the actual winter season, what does that look like and feel like to you? And then how does that inform the winter part of your cycle? Like, can you see correlations? There's also a winter part of like the day. Like we can be really nerdy and like, I don't want to like go super on a tangent because I love this exercise so much, but you basically get this massive map that really gives you so much information about those different parts of a cycle and how, like for me, I'm so clear on like, oh, winter is rest and spring is playful and summer is a time of being visible, and then autumn is like, okay, admin, get it down. That's because I've gone through this process and I know like just my innate knowledge in my body. I'm like, this is what those seasons feel like to me. And so I can so easily identify them in my menstrual cycle, in my creative cycle, in like my workflow. I can be like, oh, I'm in the winter of this project. Oh, I'm in the autumn of that other thing. So cool. I'm like, it's just, yeah, beautiful. Anyways, we go deep into different cycle frameworks, including incorporating tarot, and astrology. Tarot is another cycle framework that I love to use, whether that's, looking at it as court cards or, each zodiac season maps to different tarot cards. We can talk about that. You can pull tarot cards, you could pull 4 cards for your month, and use that as a framework. So we'll dive all into that. Also identifying your daily vitals. So I talked about, I mentioned earlier how like, if I was creating a cycle practice for myself right now, I might bring awareness to my body domain. So we're going to talk about like, how do you identify your different domains? Like, what does that even mean? What do I mean when I say my body domain, and how do I know what that needs? Like when I'm like, oh, body domain, that's this, and this, because I know my daily vitals. I know how to feel nourished and taken care of, basically, in all areas of my life. And that is a big thing that's come out of cycle tracking for me. It starts with like my body. What does my body need? Because like it's our inner landscape, right? But then it also extends to like social relationships, creativity, work, like again, expanding that cycle awareness outside of myself even, and knowing like what is my business, what cycle is my business, like what part of my business has its own cycle, what is it doing, and then therefore what does it need, like identifying that. And then as well as exercises to help you create supportive structures for your entire year. So going back to like we're all in 1,000 cycles at any one moment. It's great to do this. We're going to do this. If you sign up now, we'll do this in summer. Cool. But there's so many different factors that mean what we do in summer or if you're in the Southern Hemisphere, what we do in your winter. You might need something entirely different 6 months from now. And nothing's gone wrong. I think this is like one of the hardest lessons for me to wrap my brain around was I'd be like, but I figured it all out. I got my systems, I got my routines, I'm on top of everything. And now it's all fallen apart. Like, why? What's going wrong? Nothing's gone wrong. Like, it didn't fall apart. I've just entered a different part of like the bigger cycle that I'm in. And so now I need different things. Like it's literally just being like, okay, here's the like cheat sheet for summer season. Cool. Now we're in autumn. An autumn cheat sheet has to come out and it changes. So we'll go through that, creating those supportive structures for your entire year. So you can, whenever you buy, you can start going through the course materials right away. At the moment, I'm still building them out. So you will get your downloads for the journaling. And coming this week, there'll be a video about how to use those. But new material is going to be consistently added until it's all up. But you get access to that right away, and you choose when you want to start your coaching. So you can, if you're like, I'm ready to get started, I want to get started with my daily tracking and incorporating those weekly reflections, we can start now. But you might want to wait, and you might want to do the daily tracking on your own for 30 days. And then come to me and be like, okay, I did the tracking, and now like, here's what I noticed. I'd like to start coaching with a focus on that. You can choose, you choose when you want to start that coaching. You get 3 months of Voxer coaching, and you can always add on more if it ends up not being enough. And so the price is £720 or 3 monthly payments of $240. But because it's Pride Month and because I'm still building out the course materials, I'm offering 25% off, and also like a thank you for sitting through this workshop. You use the code Neuroqueer, and that brings it down to $540 or 3 monthly payments of $180. That's valid until the end of this month. And I just included a screenshot of how you add the coupon code, because I know many times I have like gone to apply someone's coupon code and then not seen it until like I'm like on the verge of checking out. I'm like, I don't, my neurodivergent brain needs to know exactly where to enter the coupon code. So I've created a screenshot for you. If you have any questions, you can feel free to reach out to me. Leave me a message in the comments, or you can come find me on Instagram. I'm at Jolie Caparco. Again, there'll be a link to my Instagram in the description. There's a link to the Charting You course in the description. I would love to work with you all. Thank you so much for being here. 1 hour and 34, not too bad. Kind of kept it to the time limit. Thank you everyone for watching, and I will talk to you soon.